All right, I think it's working. Yeah, all right. Hello to my fellow instrumentalists who have already subscribed to the channel, and hi to the rest of you who haven't yet. I'm Jacques Gadway, and this is Gadway Violin. In today's video, we're doing another episode, in this case a live stream, of one of my series called Making Decisions on the Violin. In this series, if you don't already know, I, a professional violinist, take a look at a piece of music that I either haven't played before or haven't played in quite some time. In today's video, we're looking at the Malagueña by Sarasate, and this is certainly one of those examples where I technically have played this piece, but it's been a very long time. The last time I played this piece was all the way back when I was a freshman in high school. And the piece was very difficult for me then, so it's probably going to be difficult for me now as well, because it's what we call a showpiece. It's a very virtuosic piece of music, and in general, I must admit, I don't like showpieces very much. I think that the phrase comes to mind, selling the sizzle, not the steak, when I hear showpieces. And that's because they're very exciting, they're very fun, but to me, there's not much depth to them. Oops. And I lost my live stream here. Okay, I think it's still going now. Yes, it is. Okay, great. So we're going to take a look at the beginning here now of this Sarasate Malagueña, and we're just going to talk about my fingerings, my choices, what bowings I might use, and so forth. And we're going to treat it as if I have to learn this for a performance, and I don't have a lot of time. Ideally, within the hour, we will have covered the entire piece, all 4 pages. I don't think I will have necessarily learned it to the level of performance, but we're going to try our best. So let's start from the top. So at the beginning, it has this figure here in 3/8. It says piano, but it is molto dolce. Molto dolce? God, that's hard to say. And we are the soloist, obviously. We're supposed to be playing with piano, so we don't want to play it too softly. And we see that Roman numeral 4 on top, and that to us indicates that we're to play it on the 4th string, which just means the G string. And I like the fingering that's written. In general, with this piece of music, in show pieces in general, it's usually written by a very good violinist, and often the bowings and the fingering suggestions will come directly from that musician or composer. So most likely, a lot of the bowings that we're going to see in this are coming directly from Sarasate, as well as some of the fingerings. So it's a good idea when trying it out at the very beginning to start by trying to execute exactly the bowings that are written and the fingerings that are written, and then transitioning from there to whatever might be the most comfortable for you. So we're going to try our best to do exactly what's written at first before making any changes. So far, so good. Let's take a look at this second line here. It's literally the same thing. All right, the next line, we continue. We're going to be in 3rd position as marked. Okay, not super in tune, but not too bad. So from this 3rd line here, the fingering marked, I don't hate, but you might find some discomfort with it if your 4th finger is not used to creating a thick vibrato. It can be kind of challenging to shift with the 4th finger and maintain a vibrato. A solution to this would just be to not shift down on the 4th finger, and then to shift down after this D natural here. But I don't like that either because we will have to shift right back up afterwards. I think what I would do if I didn't do the 4/4 is probably 4/3, shift to second finger on the C sharp, so that we're in second position for all three of those notes. And then shifting up to that 1 like is marked. So just for our reference, that optional fingering that I might do instead would be fourth finger as written, and then this would be a third finger as written, but then we'd shift down to a second finger on that C sharp, and then we would stay in that position until we shifted up to that first finger. However, I personally like the feeling of the top fingering, so I'm going to do that. So from the third line here. One thing I'd like to note about this is that because we have this new rhythm here with the 32nd notes and the 16th notes, it's actually pretty important that we make sure there is a distinction between that feeling and the feeling of these triplets that we had before. So for that, I'm just going to make sure that those 30-second notes sound very, very quick. So that there's no doubt that it's not a triplet. After that little retardando, we go back into an odd tempo here, and we're still in second position. But I think, because I like the feeling of it in the previous measure, this is in the beginning of the line, that 4/4, I think I'm going to do it again here. There's no fingering marked, but it's the same intervallic pattern. Is that a word? Intervallic. It's the same pattern of intervals. So I think the fingering should work out nicely as a pattern. So in theory, we would be in second position doing 4/4 and then shifting up to that 1 there. And I think it's going to work nicely. The only difference that I have here between this little pattern here in fingering and the pattern next to it is going to be that we're going to shift on the half step, which is presented here. So we're going to shift to a third finger on that C sharp instead of in the other example where we're shifting to the C sharp on that second finger, right? Because the half step is presented between those two parts. In general, in violin playing, it's good to find either half steps or strong beats to place our shifts on when we're choosing fingerings. In this case, we have to choose. Sometimes it ends up being both at once, where we have a half step and a strong beat, and that's always nice. But here, it's quite simple to just do it over the half step. And we're not going to crescendo because we have a subito forte on the downbeat. We see that fourth finger written, but it should be on the G string as well. So all that is on the G string, and we're following exactly the fingers that are marked. The only thing that's not marked, which is just not marked because it should be somewhat obvious, is that we're going to use a first finger on that G sharp because it's really the only finger we can use for it. So that's going to bring us down into half position. And I'm playing this in half position, so that means I'm going to be on a second finger on the A, which means that I need that A to bring me back up. However, alternatively, you could use a first finger on that A, so you could go up to a first position here, but I'm going to be on a second finger in half position, which means that my second finger has to shift up to find an F sharp. but if you did a first finger on the bottom here on that A, then that first finger would need to find an E natural, right? It would need to find that E natural. But since I'm on the second finger, I'm going to find an F sharp to find that new position, which would be fifth position. So let's go from that G sharp at the beginning of the line. Half position. I'm going to find F sharp. Obviously, that was a gross exaggeration. You'll want to cover it somewhat. But the second finger still goes there even if we don't hear it. Same fingering. And then I like to do a little retake here, I think, in preparation for that down bow. So we have... Yeah, the fingering is just as written here. And I wouldn't worry too much about all these little polka writs that are written. Essentially, to me, that's just giving you a little bit of freedom to do what feels natural. I don't think you should adhere to anything super strict here. I think the idea is that at the ends of these phrases, we're having these little morendos, these little dying aways, that are really up to you to pace. And I don't think they need to be paced linearly, meaning that they get consistently slower. They could get slower really fast, but then stay at a tempo. You know, it's kind of up to you, and in this case, your pianist that you're working with for this piece. For me, I'm just thinking of it like these triplets. Even though it says polka writ, I'm really throwing them away. I don't want to give them too much emphasis or uniqueness on every single note. I'd rather them feel more like a gesture. After that C natural, we're going to be in third position, excuse me. And we're going to use that first finger to bring us up to that new position, which is fifth position. When we shift here between that first finger that we're already on, I'll put the parentheses whenever we're supposed to be obviously on that finger already. And then we're going to shift up to what note? We're going to shift up to an E natural. This is the way that I like to think of it. I don't necessarily mark it all the time, but I'm still thinking about it every single time I'm deciding on these shifts. This is what our fundamental shift is, moving from a C natural to an E natural. So that first finger's on an E natural, and then we're in the new position, which is fifth position. So let's take a look at that from that in-tempo C natural. So as always, even though we are thinking of that fundamental shift, we don't need to hear it. And this is suggesting to go all the way down to fourth position from here, which would solve our issue and get us back into the position we need to be. We do need to find a way to at least fourth position so we can play that first finger on that D natural. But I think a nice alternative fingering is to follow the pattern we've been using preceding this, which is if we're on a third finger here, which we are, not shifting on the fourth finger, but actually we would be on a second finger in position and then using the half step that presents itself as an opportunity to shift from 2 to 3. That brings us to the end of the first page, and now we go to the second page, which has all this nonsense. Now, this is the fun part, obviously, but it's also the part that I don't typically like very much. It's not overly difficult, actually. It's just, You know, people like the left-hand pizzicato. I don't. I think it doesn't sound great. But people want to learn it, I guess, and some people do like it. So let's talk about it. So in this section, you can see we have pizzicato written here. And then we have these plus signs. Every time we have this plus sign, that indicates that we are going to be doing a left-hand pizzicato. Now, there's not an arco written on these notes, but I think it's pretty traditional to play arco on these notes so that we're alternating pizz, arco, left-hand pizz, arco, left-hand pizz, rather than it being pizz and then another pizz alternating between pizz and left hand. So what I mean by that is from the top here, rather than it being it's going to be, actually that's not a left hand pizz there. I guess we can do the pizz though. But to each their own. I think it is traditional to do those all bowed, except for the pizzes that are written as the triple stops. Yeah, super annoying. I don't really like it, but let's talk about how to do it. So one of the things when we do decide to do these arcos is that when you're doing this traditional technique of arco versus left-hand pizz, it's common for these arco notes to be very snappy and at the tip. Almost percussive. That's a better tempo for me to try this. So yeah, we're hitting the string with our bow kind of at the tip, coming from the air each time. And we're not just doing a bunch of non-directional hits, we are still thinking about them either as up bows or down bows. So I'm going up bow, down bow. One tip is because we want to get to the tip for those. One tip is because we want to get to the tip for those arcos. We want to use that pizzicato, that pluck of the strum, to really take us there. So use a lot of direction. It doesn't need to be louder. I'm just playing it loudly because I want to. And using that motion to get you to the tip. Let's talk about how to do the left-hand pizzicato. For me, left-hand pizzicato is really created by understanding how you're placing your fingertip on the string. Generally, for good violin technique, we want to have our fingers placed on the what we call thumb side of the finger, right? The left side of the finger. So if you look at the E string here, I'm placing my finger over here on this side of the strings as best as I can. This is going to create a natural angle in the fingers that's quite soft. But notice, when we do left-hand pizzicato, we need to pluck in this direction, which means that if we are already on this side of the string, we're going to have a hard time gripping the string for those pizzas. So we want to actually place our fingers a little bit differently, a little bit more on the fatty part of the finger, so that there's more friction to pull the string. And then the finger underneath needs to make sure that it's placed quite hard on the string, because how long a pizzicato lasts is often determined by how successfully stopped the string is. If the string is even partially stopped and not fully, then we don't get any ring whatsoever. The string kind of dies immediately. So with that, another thing that we want to think about when we're doing left-hand pizz is we want to think about the direction we're pulling the finger. Refrain from pulling the finger in the direction of the hand, because that's going to result in a lot of unused force, right? If our direction of our finger is angled, we're not getting the maximum pull out of our finger. So we want to think of pulling our finger as horizontal and or upwards as we can, rather than thinking towards the hand, which is going to result in some wasted energy. Yeah, that's not a bit. And then, of course, you just want to have the finger down that you need to left-hand pits. And you really don't want any other fingers down. So in the case of that first measure, we want to left-hand pits the F sharp. So there's no reason for our second finger to be down. And then likewise here in the first measure of the second line, we want to have just our second finger down for that G natural, because that's what we want to left-hand pits. So if the third finger's down, it's just a waste of energy. All right, let's take through that section until we get to the next part. Fingering written here, but I should note that we probably want to do a third finger here, meaning we shift up to third position, so that we can do 3, 1, 0, and therefore the 3 can pluck for the 1, and the 1 can pluck for the open. Here. And here is the beast, right? We have these consecutive left-hand pitses. So we need to prep all of our fingers on those fatty parts so that we have as much friction as possible for the pulls. Notice how there's not a plus sign on that last one, because we're going to use our bow. But here there is a plus sign on that last one because we're going to use that open string that the first finger can certainly pull. And then here I think there's a mistake. It says to left-hand pits this G, but I don't think that's very reasonable, and I don't think anybody will notice much of a difference. Geez, if I can do it. If we just bow that G instead of left-hand pits it, it's going to be the same pattern as we had before, right? Here we don't left-hand pits that last one, so I think it's just a mistake in the publishing, and it's meant to be the same kind of thing where we bow it. So going from right here, it just doesn't sound good. Even when you do it correctly, I mean, I think I'm doing it right. I mean, it sounds cool, it's kind of fun, but I just don't really like it, honestly. After that nonsense, we go on to the next section. We're doing exactly what's written here, where we're just doing these fingerings, right? I like these fingerings. We're in third position. It's not marked, but we should be going to third position for that D. And then we're just in third position for all of this, and we just stretch for this octave, not this octave, this harmonic here. Stretch. Stretch. And then we go back down to, I like first position here. Now I like this fingering that's marked here, I think. One thing I would note is rather than shifting between this 16th note and this 16th note, it makes more sense to me always to find a shift when possible, either on a strong beat, on a half step, or after a long note. Because whenever we shift, it has to take time out of some note. And ideally, you're taking from a longer note. So we have this long tie, right? And if we shift after that tie to a second finger here, then we can borrow some time from that previous long note, rather than shifting quickly between the two 16 notes. So that's going to look like shifting here, and then following the fingering as written, which shifts us into fourth position here. Back down to second position afterwards. I like this fingering. It's really pretty. Again, a lot of these fingerings are going to work really nicely because they're written by most likely a very good violinist. Most likely Sarasate himself. We're shifting up to third position here. And then we're just stretching our finger for that harmonic. Not moving out of third position at all. This says to do a harmonic here. But I generally think there's no reason to do a harmonic, and we can actually do a nice, other than it makes it easier. But I don't like to make decisions purely based off of what makes it easier. First and foremost, I want to make a decision based off of what musically I want to happen. And I don't know if I want a harmonic sound here when we can get a nice pretty vibrato instead. But then what do? We could just shift on this half step here. So if we do a fourth finger solid, then we're in fourth position, and then we could use this half step to shift from 2 to 2, so that we're in third position. And then it works out with the fingering that is to come. Shifting down to third. Once again, not doing a harmonic on this E, shifting up to a solid fourth finger for fourth position. All right, pretty simple stuff, honestly. It sounds a lot more difficult than it is. We're in fourth position. And we're still in fourth position, and we just stay there until the third beat of that measure. Shifting on, once again, what are we deciding for our shifts, or how do we decide where we shift? We try to shift on either half steps, strong beats, or what was the last one? After long notes. We don't have a long note anywhere near here, right? But we do have strong beats. We have a strong beat at the beginning of each of these groups. And so shifting to second position here is a great option because it shifts on one of those strong beats. It helps us stay organized and coordinated. These grace notes are going to give you some grief. I'm just doing them right on the beat. And then we're shifting not on a strong beat. This is one of those rare instances where we don't get to follow any of our rules for shifting. We're going to use this fingering because I think it honestly is the best option. We're going to shift not on a strong beat, not after a long note, right? We're shifting after a 32nd note, and not on a half step. This is a whole step. But we're going to shift anyways, because the alternative is to shift on this strong beat, but we have this crazy grace note, which is going to make that very uncomfortable. We could shift on the grace note, but it's going to make it not super clean. Theoretically, we could shift to a second finger there, but I think that's going to be too cumbersome. So we're going to keep the fingering here and understand that sometimes our rules of thumb must be broken. Let's try that again. We're going to go all the way back to that piano now. And for a lot of these 16th note kind of pickups back into the new section, we can take a little time, have a little fun with it. We don't have to be so strict with the rhythm. We don't have to be so mechanical. This is so silly. I mean, it's fun. I'll give you that. It is a fun piece, but I still don't think I like it. Just for your reference, we're going to stay on the G string here. And to accommodate that, the fingering is in first position here, and then we shift to that first finger on the C natural. And then for these false harmonics, there's no other way to do it that's comfortable without just doing a 1/4 fingering, right? So we have to think about what those positions are on the A string. This G string is only going to apply until the false harmonics. We're obviously not going to try to do the false harmonics there. And one way that we can be sure that he didn't intend for that is that he reiterates the 4th finger marking here, which tells us that we were obviously breaking from it preceding that. Let's see, what fingering works best here? I think I like to just reach back that half step for that first finger. Excuse me. Just reaching back for a first finger, and we're going to put a circle around it to indicate that it's a reach and not a shift. That way we're still in 3rd position because we are in 3rd position here with a 3rd finger. And then we can just bring our first finger back for these false harmonics. Ugh, so tough. One thing to note is we probably want to make sure we don't get too far on that up bow so that we don't get stuck in the lower half, because we want these to all be on up bows probably. They don't have to be at the tip, but we don't want them to be all the way at the frog. And then the bane of my existence, this part of the piece, which is just one of those techniques that you're going to, if you want to play this really well, you're going to spend hours and hours in the practice room just on this little measure here, this little horrible measure, to learn how the heck to do this essentially glissando. And then 14 years later or so, I don't know how long it's been, when you try to do this for a YouTube live stream, you're not going to have retained any of that practice you did. So I wouldn't waste your time on it, but if you want to do it, I think the idea here is we're going to essentially do a vibrato as we shift. It's really not super, I'm not worried about being super accurate. The idea is to make sure that it sounds like there's these individual things happening, but really it's just a glissando that starts very rhythmically accurate. It starts right on the and of one, right on that B flat, and then it ends right on that 3rd beat. Who knows? Did I play exactly these 6 notes in between? Probably not. Did it sound pretty much right? I think so. So don't overthink it. You're just going to do this kind of vibrato where you're kind of hitting your fingers forward as they slide. And then I like to do that all on the D string so that we don't have to change strings after that. So We're on the D string for all of this. Which brings us into that 5th position, 4th position. And then we were recently in 5th position at the beginning of that, right? So then we can use that 5th position. We can use the memory of this 5th position as context for where our first finger goes in 6th position, because it's only going to be a half step between these points. And this is the kind of thing we need to think about when we're creating these frames of reference for these ridiculous showpieces. So I'm thinking where my first finger was on that B natural, and I'm going beyond it a half step and over to the A string for that G natural, and then I'm going to go over to the E string for that 4th finger to find the G natural above. And there we find that high G. And then the fingering written here, I don't like at all. It says 3rd finger on this harmonic. Why? I think that we're doing this on the D string, which we would want a first finger so that we're in position for everything. If we are in 3rd position here, everything is very comfortable. Well, somewhat comfortable. Now, the idea here is, well, let's just talk about what fingers, or what strings rather, we're using for each of these. So we're using a D string for the first one, and then our fingers are being placed exactly where they would be if these were regular notes, not harmonics, just lightly with a harmonic feel, which means we're barely touching the string and we're playing with a more fatty part of the finger. And since these are natural harmonics, it's important that there's no fingers touching below them. Make sure you only have one finger touching the string at the point where you want the harmonic to occur. Now, we haven't been anywhere near 6th position in a while, so we have to use either the memory of the old 6th position, or we have to use the feeling of where our 4th finger wants to be. We didn't place a 4th finger, but if we did, it would land on the A string right around a G, which means we can think about replacing it with our first finger, and then finding that 4th finger. And it should work out. After that, at the end of the line, we move on to the next page, and we're going to hold that. And after that note, we're going to shift to 2nd position, and it should be similar to the finger we had before, where we're going to shift into 4th position here, I think. Here it says to do, but I kind of hate that. I hate the idea of playing a first finger on one string in one place and then quickly playing it on a different string in a different place. Don't like that. So instead, we're going to follow one of our rules, which is shifting on a strong beat, and we're going to shift to a 2nd finger. Here's a strong beat. We can shift into a 2nd finger, therefore bringing us to 1st position, and that follows our rules and therefore is comfortable. Notice here we don't follow our rules, but I think it's actually quite comfortable. And this can go quite fast. Quite fast indeed, but it's actually not all that difficult. A lot of the fingerings are going to be within positions with repeated notes, right? We have a lot of these kinds of oscillations where we're going back and forth between 2 fingers, so it looks a lot more impressive than it is. Now let's talk about the fingerings. I'm basically doing exactly the fingerings that we have marked here. I think they work out really nicely. Let me see if there's any fingerings that I played that aren't written, that I just played instinctively. Yeah, so this is not marked, but because we have the open string here on the D, we're going to use that open string to come back down into first position. Then back into third. So another rule that we didn't talk about is we shift on half steps, right? Strong beats, after long notes, and sometimes over open strings. Open strings essentially give us extra time for our shifts and allow us to hide them by being over an open string and therefore clean because we don't hear the finger moving. So those are also options for shifts often. The next shift in that measure, as you saw, is actually on a strong beat, so that's one of our rules and it works nicely. We're going to break a rule here where we're shifting not on a strong beat, not on an open string, not on a half step, not after a long note, but I do think it works out nicely. But let's think about an alternative, see if we can do something that exists within our rules. So an alternative fingering that you could do to follow all of our rules would just add an extra shift, which would be to shift here to a second finger on the B natural, therefore being in first position, and then doing a finger replacement from 1 to 2 on this strong beat on the third. I'll show you what that looks like. Oops, I played the wrong fingering. So shifting here, finger replacement. And then you see here, this part has, again, breaking some rules where we shift not on a strong beat, but it is a finger replacement. And generally, finger replacements are similar to the way we think of half steps. You can use them as opportunities to shift, even when they're not on strong beats, after open strings, or after long notes. So this is totally fine. So if we use the fingering that was originally published here, we're going to finger replace that first finger. And then we're doing this pretty regular fingering that we find in some of our broken scales, where we're just shifting to second fingers on these ands, on the ands of beats. Alternatively, I don't know what would be better. Let's see. No, I like the fingering written. I think it works nicely because it gets us up to the position we need to be in most comfortably. We're going to use this open string to shift down. It's not marked, but we are using that open E to shift down to a 1 here. This fingering is exactly as written. We're shifting up to that 4th position. Let's bring it down here. Yeah, through this whole section, it's all basically the same stuff. We don't get anything unique until down here where we're in second position, and we're going to shift up and down. This is something we could do theoretically on 2 strings for ease. But I think, again, it's a showpiece. You're showing off. And so sometimes the inconvenient fingering is the preferred fingering because it looks cool. So from the in tempo. And because we're doing this ridiculous fingering, I think it's okay to do some slides. Jeez. And what next? Yeah, I'm doing exactly the fingering marked here where we're using this half step to get back into second position so that we're ready for another one of these ridiculous octave jumps. Fun! Oh, I should play it right once at least. Jeez! Obviously this takes some practice, huh? I don't remember this being this difficult when I was a freshman in high school, but maybe I have higher standards now, or maybe I'm just getting old. Okay, this fingering to me is ridiculous. Why would we shift up here to a 1? I think we either stay in first position or we go up and, you know, continue that trend and do it kind of on the G string. But I hate it. So let's just do it in first position. Stay easy. We would need to shift up here for the harmonics. So we'll, instead of shifting earlier, we're going to just stay and shift to third position here for that G natural, which will give us a nice position for these harmonics. We're almost there. All right, we're on the final page here. Jeez. Any questions at all so far? I see we have some concurrent viewers, which is good. But no live chat questions. It's totally fine. I'll keep going regardless. We take a look at the final page here, where we're up in 5th position. And as you notice, probably, it is the same as the beginning, right? If we recall, the beginning was the same idea, just on the G string. I'm using the exact same fingerings I used in the beginning. Now I'm suggesting to do a third finger here, but I'm not. I'm going to do exactly what I did in the beginning, which is a 4th finger. So I'm doing the same fingering as we did before, which is 4, 4, just following that pattern, right? Now we find 7th position, 4th finger on this A. Just, again, we're literally doing the same fingerings, just on the E string instead of the G string, and it's not exactly the same positions, but it's the same fingerings and intervals. Once again, we need to find that F sharp with our 2nd finger, just as we did on the first page and on the G string. Now it's on the E string though. Of course, we don't need to hear the F sharp. but we're still using that idea to guide our shift. After that, we go into the G string, which is much more like the beginning even. Literally the same. So literally the same as the beginning up until right here. Something I'd like to note is that for all of these, especially when we're doing our forte sound, really trying to get that big sound and save bow, we need to make sure we're playing into the bridge. Sounding point very close to the bridge. So that was a little out of tune, but let's talk about it. We're in fourth position here, and we just stay there for all of that. We're doing a harmonic. We're still in fourth. I think I like to use this harmonic as an opportunity to shift down into third position. So after this harmonic, we shift down to third so that we're there. And then we shift up to sixth. And then we're just doing a classic kind of arpeggio fingering where we have 1, 3, stretched 4. And then we shift down quickly onto that A natural. If you practice your flesh scales and arpeggios, this should be really familiar to you. This is the same finger feeling and stretch that we have at the top of our scales when we're doing, I think it's like the fourth arpeggio or whatever. It's the arpeggio that is of the fourth scale degree, the subdominant arpeggio. In this case, that would be if we were doing an A major scale in arpeggios, and we did it to the A major, but focusing on the subdominant arpeggio. Where we find that first finger on the D, and then we find that stretch for the fourth finger. A major is probably a bad example because the fingerings for that first finger scale are different than most of the second finger scales in the Flesh series, but it's the same idea. If you practice your scales and arpeggios, this sensation of stretching that fourth finger should not be new to you. As should not this, just as this shift down should not feel new either. It's just a simple arpeggio. And something that's not written here is that that open string is what's taking us down to first position. This is just a diminished arpeggio. Whenever students ask, why should we practice scales and arpeggios? This is why. I shouldn't have to write these fingerings in for a student that knows and practices their diminished arpeggios regularly. If you practice the Flesh system, for example, all of these finger patterns are commonly used. So if you're curious though, the fingering without shifts is this, I believe. Yep. So all that's in first position just with little stretches. So that's a low 4, natural 1, low 1, high 2, natural 2. And then right after, we got to shift all the way back up. And you got to practice it so that you don't need to put a gap like I'm doing. I'm cheating a little bit. Yeah, see, if I don't cheat, I don't do it. With with a little practice, that'll be in good shape. After the final one, we have the last line of this showpiece. And I think the fingerings here are good, but let's check them. Yeah, so we're doing exactly the fingerings marked here, and if you do them quickly, you won't have to do changes of bow. You could do it all in one, but we'll do it 4 notes to a bow for now, just to check the fingering. Yeah, we're just gonna do exactly that. It's not too bad. The one kind of tricky thing is gonna be doing these regular shifts, and then all of a sudden having to do this little finger replacement in the midst of all that. I can already tell you, I'm going to tend to be sharp on this D natural when I put the first finger there, switching from 2 to 1, because the preceding shifts were actually substantial. Right, we did a shift into 3rd, and then a 3rd to 5th, and now we're going from 5th only a half step into 6th, and so my hand gets a little bit stunned by that difference. But with a little practice, even that will get cleared up. The final little shift, or big shift rather, is simply a stretch of that second finger to that D, where we're going to trill 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. And then I'm not going to focus so much on doing that turn or that C sharp here in the same tempo as my trill as I normally would do. And I'm mainly doing that out of convenience. I'm going to allow it to be a little bit out of time. And that's because it's going to allow me to actually get the intonation really, really crystal clear, because the fingers are so close and really fat compared to the smallness of the intervals this high up on the instrument. So if I don't give myself time to actually squeeze that finger in, we won't get a proper half step. All right, with that was the Malagueña from Sarasate. Obviously not ready for performance yet for me, but we've made our decisions. All it would take now is probably many, many hours of practicing through it and making sure all my shifts and everything is sounding really great. I hope that you found that helpful, or if you're learning this piece, that you have the patience to do the work, because once you've decided on everything, it's time for the real work to begin. And that means sitting there, or hopefully standing there if you can do it for long enough, and practice with good posture, all of these really ridiculous techniques found throughout this movement. But the important bit of wisdom I would give you is, remember that this is a showpiece. It's not that deep. It's really just supposed to be fun, and don't overly stress it. Obviously, you want it to sound good and you want to execute the techniques at a high level, but don't forget what the purpose is, right? It's to show off, it's to have fun. Obviously, do with it what you will, but I encourage you to try to make the most of it, and don't overthink it. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be showy, and once you have it at a good level, make sure you play it in front of as many people as possible, because why learn a showpiece if you're not gonna show off? With that, I thank you for watching. Please don't hesitate to subscribe if you're not already, and leave a comment below if you want me to look at another piece of music in the future, or any other concepts of violin playing. I really like to use your feedback. This was an example of that. We decided to do this because it was left on a previous video, a comment to do the Sarasate Malagueña. So if there's a piece of music you'd like me to do, please leave it below, and I'll get to it as soon as I get to it. With that, happy practicing. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like so that other people find this as well. And let's end this stream.